Good morning. Thanks for joining me on the Meg Ellefson Show. You know what I haven't done in a while is remind you that if you, for whatever reason, miss any of the gold, I tell you, during the course of and now it's been 5 hours a day that I'm on the air, which is no small feat. I'm not crying. You don't need to send me Kleenex or anything, but it just takes a lot of, chutzpah to come up with material that is entertaining as well as enlightening on the Meg Ellefson Show and the Wisconsin Morning News earlier in the morning. But if you've missed any of the conversations for any reason, I forgive you. However, go back out to WSIU.com, and all of those conversations are podcasted for your listening enjoyment. Speaking of listening enjoyment, very happy, as always, on our Wednesdays to be joined by, from Institute for Reforming Government, attorney extraordinaire, Jay Curtis. How are you?
Good. How are you, Meg?
Good, thanks. You must be in the car.
I am in the car. Had to take my daughter to her music lesson.
Oh.
So.
What instruments does she play?
The clarinet.
Oh, that's nice. I remember back in the day, and maybe I shouldn't even say this to you, here's some unsolicited parenting advice coming. Brace yourself. I remember that there was some theory that playing reed instruments causes an overbite. Is that no longer accurate?
I don't think so. She's got braces. I think she's good
all
there.
Right.
So.
Well, she's covered, so there won't be any issues like that. So, all right.
Yeah.
Is she in the car with you right now and going, oh my gosh, Dad, you're so embarrassing?
No, she's actually in her lesson.
Okay. So. All right. So all is safe. Okay. So let's talk about tonight's debate between Judge Brad Schimmel and Judge Susan Crawford. What do you anticipate is going to, are we going to see more of the, I don't know. It'll be fun. What do you think is going to happen?
Yeah, interesting opportunity here, I think, for both candidates. This is the one and only debate, as far as I know. I think they're kind of publicizing it as the one and only debate, so I guess it's always possible that there's another one that's snuck in next week, but I think this is going to be it. So this is going to be the one opportunity for these two candidates to be in the same room together, to address some of the attack ads, right? I think that's always an interesting moment in a debate, other than maybe just by chance, crossing paths on the campaign trail. Often in these political campaigns, whether it's a legislative race or a judicial race, these candidates aren't together, other than these one opportunities at these debates to be in the room and actually address each other face to face. So I think that's why, whether it's a presidential debate or a debate for the state assembly, debates are there's still interesting opportunities to impact a race. Now, I think it's fair to say you're not going to win or lose a race by a debate. The reality is, I can't imagine there's going to be a lot of people spending their evening tonight watching this debate. But I think, when you talk to political people, the smart political people, they have pointed out now with social media that with these debates, it's not so much individuals, Meg, like you and I, that are going to spend our 7 o'clock to 8 o'clock watching this debate.
Oh, what a couple of nerds!
Right. That's the reality. Is there's not going to be a lot of live viewers. However, these are they're both sophisticated campaigns. They're going to be looking for that one or two kind of viral type clips,
sound bites
that they can put on sound bites that they can put on social media. And so I think that's the opportunity for these campaigns, is to kind of have that viral moment, that key sound bite that can really impact race, because that your average person that's at least on social media, so it's probably not maybe the average voter, but certainly kind of that grassroots voter that's on Twitter and Facebook and following this, that can have an impact, right? Though that moment, whether it's a really good moment or if you're a candidate that makes a mistake and the opponent takes advantage of that, right? Those are all things that can be repackaged and put on social media. So again, I think the objective reality is this is not going to win or lose the campaign, but there is opportunities to have an impact on the race to actually, take your opponent down a peg or two. So again, I think there's value. Specifically as to tonight's debate, I think there's a kind of an opportunity for both candidates. If you're Judge Schimmel, I think, and look, obviously I support Judge Schimmel, but just kind of objectively looking at the race, he needs to kind of change the narrative. Right now, I think it's fair to say the narrative of this race is Judge Crawford trying to stop Elon Musk and Donald Trump from dismantling the federal government. Now, what does that have to do with Wisconsin judicial race? I mean, really nothing.
Mm-hmm.
But that is the narrative right now. And if you're Judge Schimmel, you need to change that narrative. You need to get this race back focused on, the reality of having a judge that's going to not dismantle every legislative act that we've seen over the last 15 years, that's not going to be beholden to the progressive left. I mean, that's the narrative that Judge Schimmel needs to get out there tonight. And if you're Judge Crawford, again, I think right now she's effectively making this race about Elon Musk, which obviously has nothing to do with the race. I mean, yes, he's spending money in this race. So is George Soros and Governor Pritzker and Hoffman from LinkedIn, the billionaire. I mean, that really should be a wash. But right now, I mean, the reality is, right, Republicans have the White House. The media is never going to be favorable to us, and they're certainly not going to be favorable to conservatives when they actually hold the reins of power, at least at the federal level. So, I know Judge Schimmel is working hard. I think his campaign is doing, for the most part, the right things. I just think they really need to do what they can to change the narrative, and I think that's what we have tonight. I think there's an opportunity to change the narrative and get the race back focused on kind of judicial philosophy, the fact that Judge Crawford's values simply don't match the values of Wisconsin. I'm sure, Meg, you and your listeners saw that rally that Senator Sanders led last weekend, I think in Kenosha, where you had the most obscene. I mean, like, it's, for people like you and I, Meg, it's pretty difficult to be shocked, right? We've lived in Wisconsin politics for a long time, lived and breathed it. And I mean, even nationally, right, we are one of, if not the most competitive states. I mean, it's just year-round politics. So we're pretty grizzled. I can honestly say I was shocked when I saw that video. I mean, I actually had to really, as much as I didn't want to do digging, I had to do digging on that because I thought I didn't think it was real.
Like parody or something?
I thought, right. I mean, well, now with AI, like, you got to be careful. I'm like, this cannot have happened. And sure enough, right, I mean, it's the most disgusting, vile, bigoted. I mean, people talk about bigotry. That is bigotry, right? That is anti-Christian bigotry. There's kids in the audience. I mean, I don't even think it would be possible to come up with something more blasphemous.
I'd really like to see Susan Crawford question about this. I mean, I really would. I'd really like to hear what she has to say about this person.
Well, Brian Fraley over at the Badger Sentinel, like he did a nice piece, and as best as I could see, I mean, I thought about writing something. He kind of beat us to it, but his piece was really well done, and basically made that point. Meg, if the shoe were on the other foot, I don't know. I mean, again, it's hard to come up with a more ridiculous example, but. Somebody, in support of Judge Schimmel, and not at just some random event, right? An event orchestrated by another elected official. Just
a United States elected official, of all things.
Right. Just puts out the most egregious content. Dan Bice and the Journal-Sentinel would be all over that, with a microphone in Judge Schimmel's face, asking him to defend or at least answer to that. And as best as I can tell, there has been no. Yeah,
they swept it under the rug.
And right, now we're in the scenario where even if there was pressure and the mainstream media did something, it's too late, right? I mean, it's clearly they had no intent of ever covering that. And so again, back to kind of the debate and this race. I think if you're Judge Schimmel, right, you have to get the focus off of Musk and put the limelight back on Judge Crawford and question, is she the right fit for Wisconsin values, right? So when it's kind of ironic when these candidates are talking about their values, that's inappropriate, right? I don't think they should be talking about their personal values. Here, I think if you're Judge Schimmel, you try to make the argument like these offices should be nonpartisan. They should be focusing on interpreting the law, and that's what I'm going to do. And if you're Judge Crawford, I think at least some of the people she's aligning herself with, I can't imagine really would see any support other than the most extreme far left element of the progressive movement in Wisconsin.
Okay, so who's hosting this debate and who's moderating it? Do you know?
That's a good question. So Wiz Politics has done a good job previewing it, but I'm actually not sure who's
well, I mean, because this would be an opportune time to address this. And I mean, if Susan Crawford's campaign had any integrity whatsoever, they would prep her to even be proactive about this and denouncing it. But, I mean, I don't want to give her campaign any advice, but I mean, that would be, but my guess is that they're, of course, not going to preemptively bring this up. My guess is that along with the complicit media, they're just going to hope that this issue goes away.
Right. So in answer to your question, Meg, so it's Matt Smith and Gerard Jordan. That's WISN. So in the Milwaukee area, it's WISN. Okay. Wausau is WAOW. So that's at 7:00 tonight.
Okay. All right. Well.
And yes, and your other point I think is a good one. So if you're Jordan or Smith, you're moderating this. If you're going to do your job adequately, you have to ask, because I'm sure they're going to ask Judge Schimmel about Elon Musk, which I think it's a fair question. But then they better ask Susan Crawford about the billionaire supporting her campaign, Pritzker and Hoffman and Soros, and then I sure hope they ask her about this rally, right? I mean, they're going to try to play it off. I don't believe she was there, and I don't think technically it was a rally for Crawford. But I'm sorry, if you're Senator Sanders, you're not coming here for any
ice cream
reason other than to juice the turnout for Judge Crawford. And so I think it's fair to ask her what her response would be if she supports this sort of rhetoric. If this is, if she wants to talk about values, are these her Wisconsin values? And if so, does she think that this is a majority view to absolutely completely in the most disgusting and vile way attack Christians? I hope she gets asked that question tonight.
Yeah, well, and we might be hoping a long time because I guess the cynical Meg doesn't. I'm not confident that the moderators will be that. I don't know if they'll have the forethinking to actually have a question like that. I mean, it'll be interesting. I guess a recap of this debate will be an interesting conversation as well.
Well, and I'm not as familiar with Jordan, but Matt Smith, from what I've reviewed kind of over the last few years, I think is pretty objective. I'm hopeful that he will. I mean, he should ask both candidates the tough questions. I mean, that's the point of a debate, is to ask them the questions. This is the one time they're going to be in the room together, and I think there is kind of a public service element to this. That this is an opportunity to actually draw contrast between the two candidates and let the people decide. And I'm confident that the philosophy that's been embraced by Judge Schimmel is the one that I do think a majority of Wisconsinites support. I think they support a nonpartisan, objective judiciary. The question is, can the campaign kind of cut through the rhetoric and the media bias and actually get that message out to the voters. And I guess, we'll see in a few weeks.
I'm just looking. It looks like Matt Smith from WISN has posted something about the debate. Maybe it would be worth, I don't know, some of you listeners that are on X to go out to WISN. You can find Matt Smith through WISN because he just posted. And then maybe make some suggestions about questions that ought to be discussed during the course of this debate if they are, honest moderators. That would be my suggestion to those listening.
It's a great idea.
All right,
I might do it myself.
Oh, well, hey, well done. Thank you. And maybe I will as well. Take my own advice. Okay, so before we run out of time, speaking of Schimmel and Crawford, WMC, Wisconsin's chamber, has released the results of a poll from, let's see, this would have been conducted March 9th and 10th, shows there's a statistical tie between the two.
Right. So IRG did a poll, I believe 2 weeks ago, showing when the two candidates were actually identified as conservative and progressive, down 4. Judge Schimmel was down 4. The WMC poll has it at a tied race. Our poll had a margin of error of, I believe, like 3.7%. So, effectively, you could argue it was a very similar poll to WMC's. Still 5% undecided in WMC's. So, look, I think the two polls are similar, and I think the reality is they both show the same thing, that this is a tied race. And, again, anybody that thought otherwise, I'm sorry, probably just hasn't been paying attention to Wisconsin politics. The reality is either these are, just over the last 10 years, the races have either been really just not competitive because one side didn't really field a good candidate. We do have a couple outliers, right, with the 2023 election, where I think for various reasons outside the candidate's control, right, abortion in that cycle in 2020, you had a Democratic primary, presidential Democratic primary, right? Those races really weren't competitive. But other than those two cases, and then, like I said, when there's just not a real candidate fielded, these are going to be close races. This anybody that thought this was not really a tied race, I don't think is paying attention. Both sides are spending money. The money, no candidate has a overwhelming financial advantage. Both have sophisticated campaigns, and I think both sides are energized. Obviously, the left is energized because of Trump and Musk and the reforms that, frankly, the majority of the country supported and voted for. But so they're resisting. And if you're the right, IRG and other groups, I think, have done an effective job getting out really substantive information, indicating that, look, if you support conservative reforms, and these aren't just talking points, right? Because we don't do politics. We focus on actual substance and actual, in our case with our Court Watch project, actual legal precedent. The reality is a cemented progressive majority, at least through 2028, which would be the next opportunity for conservatives to actually flip the court if they don't win this cycle. A progressive majority for the next 3 years could do a lot of damage. And when I mean a lot of damage, I mean really overturning all of the conservative reforms that were implemented over the Walker years. And Meg, I know you've had us on over the last few weeks talking about the primers that we put out. We've been putting out a primer or two every week. We've talked about Act 10 and how we already have a case right now that's being litigated, and it's right now at the District 2 Court of Appeals that is absolutely going to make it to the Supreme Court. They could overturn Act 10. You have school choice, the overall business climate, the K-12 environment, voter ID, election integrity, Second Amendment. And these are all issues that we put primers out on. You can find them at reforminggovernment.org. And essentially, we've highlighted how would a progressive majority overturn these key cases, or conversely, how would a conservative majority, in all likelihood, preserve them, but not because they necessarily agree with the policy preference, but because the legislature had a rational basis to implement the reforms at the time. Whether you agree or disagree with the policy, they had a rational basis. And that's, I think, what all these cases come down to. And I think if you have a progressive majority for the next 3 years, they're really going to gut rational basis review in Wisconsin and essentially convert themselves to a super legislature. I mean, that's ultimately, right, people throw that rhetoric around, but the real substance behind it is undermining rational basis review that defers to the legislature, right, the body that's with 99 members in the Assembly, 33 members in the Senate that are popularly elected by the people of Wisconsin. If you don't have a strong rational basis review standard in your state, you're essentially putting your Supreme Court in the position of a super legislature.
Okay, last question. I know we're up against the break here, but what would it take to move Wisconsin Supreme Court elections to November?
I think that's constitutional. So I'd have to check on that. Good question. So I think it's constitutional. If not, it's statutory. Obviously, a big difference. And I think the same could be said for spring elections. I mean, we have the DPI race, where you have a spring electorate. That maybe best case scenario 35% of the electorate versus a fall election that obviously in some cases can have twice the turnout. I think that's something that should be considered. There are a lot of states out there that focus on fall elections, don't really have spring elections. And the reality is with some of these races, it's difficult. It's difficult for the average voter in a spring election with no sort of partisan label to make that decision. Now, again, you could. I'm sure there'd be some, and I think they would have a valid argument that spring elections, particularly at the local level, focus on kind of that nonpartisan nature. But it's a good question, Meg. And the reality is, most of these races, people want to know who the conservative is or who the progressive is, and it's difficult when you don't have that party label. So it's a good question. Something maybe the legislature should consider at some point.
Oh, I'll have to run for office and use that as part of my campaign strategy. No, I'm just kidding. I'm not running. So
there you go.
Don't get scared. All right, Jake Curtis from Institute for Reforming Government. Thank you. What's website URL?
Reforminggovernment.org. I finally have it down.
Yeah, well, I had to stop and think, too. I was going to back you up if you didn't, but I remembered it as well. Well, look forward to our conversation next week. Thanks so much, Jake.
Thanks, Meg. Appreciate it.
And all the best on the clarinet lessons.
Thanks.
We'll talk again next week. Going to the 10:30 news, followed by your calls on the other side, 715-845-2155 on the Meg Ellefson Show on WSAU.